damn. Alright. This has been such a nightmare today. I don't know if it's gonna work. One issue after another. So I thought, well, I was just gonna postpone the whole thing. But then I thought, what the hell? I'll give it one last try. If it works, if not, then tomorrow it is. I don't know if you guys can hear me because my iPad collapsed on me last minute. That was great. So then I've had to try it on my phone. So my one phone for some reason wouldn't work, and so I've tried it on my other phone. If it's working fine, is it okay? You can hear and see me. Alright! We is live. Allahu Akbar. People, the magic potion is being poured. Right, so... Right, let's... so Afwan, as always, had this crazy headache as well going on today. I was like, damn. I don't know whether it's just lack of sleep or crazy sleeping patterns or lack of caffeine, or I don't know what it is. So, Inna alhamdulillah wa kafah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulih al-Mustafa wa ala ibadihi alladhin artada wa man bihudahum ihtada wa bi'athari ahli al-Madinah iqtafa wa ba'd. فالسلام الله على القوم أهلا وسهلا بكم ومرحبا欢迎来自 bienvenidos a todos people بخير راغلي and swagatam. Right, so we are back. Quite a few things I want to kind of touch up on. I know it's taken me half an hour to get this up and running, so those of you just tuning in, if you'd click like and share to get this, and whilst I'm doing that, I'll just share this out myself as well. Right now, I can see those of you wondering, this is just a cushion. I can see it in this now. Right, so I'm gonna just click share here. Whew. The weather today though, ya salam. I'm just sharing that. Alright, that's good. You see, this isn't what I normally do the Facebook Live from. So that for some reason, I had my iPad on charge, and unbeknownst to me, it wasn't even connected. So when I sat down to set it up, there was just, it wouldn't work. It's too, so then I thought, alright, I'll try a different, anyway, nevertheless, as long as you guys can see me, as long as you can hear me, as long as it's not blurry, then it's all good. This is the Samsung S9 phone, so hopefully should work okay for now. There were quite a few things I wanted to discuss. Do I understand the Maghribi dialect? I understand a certain proportion of it. I believe I do anyway, so... but I'm sure, obviously, dialects can be difficult in their own sense when people speak and the speed at which they're speaking. But I can understand the gist of certain conversations in the Maghribi dialect, or I think so anyway. They're probably just fooling me. Anyway, ya salam, ya salam. Aina wasalna. Where have we got to? Right, so some things I want to highlight. Right, so this weekend, whilst people are tuning in, thinking, what's wrong with Mufti Abu Layth, for God's sake? He's never on time. You see, and that is true. That, you know, the one thing I envy in a positive way about people is I envy that, in a sense, that they have routine. In my life, I can just never seem to get a routine about anything. It's just, it's the only constant is chaos. Chaotic routine is my only routine. And and I see people with such a clockwork lifestyle, and I think, wow, what would life be like if it was like that? Nevertheless, right, so where are we at, people? Is it obligatory for Muslims to believe in sahih hadith? We believe in the sunnah, and we believe that you see, because that doesn't make any sense, that question, because that question, if you rephrase it, it's like saying, is it obligatory? Because sahih hadith is a science, it's like a hadith science and a terminology from that. So it's like saying, is it obligatory for Muslims to believe in usulul fiqh? It doesn't, so what you ought to be saying is, you need to rephrase that question. Like, do we need to give hadith importance? Is it obligatory to take every hadith that is deemed sahih by certain scholars? Then the question comes back to, well, what do we mean by deemed sahih? Because so many scholars have graded hadith differently. Many scholars placed subset conditions, like the Malikiyya, like the Hanafiya, and I would refer you to my my brief talk that I have on YouTube called it's actually that do we need that should we reject hadith? It's got a longer title beginning about Bukhari that I think it says something about the problems with Sahih Bukhari. I mean, if you type in Bukhari and reject hadith and my name, it should come up. Because in there I discuss the issue with Sahih al-Bukhari today. Oh, that's it. The problems with Bukhari in our age. And should we reject all hadith? I am not asking you usulul hadith. Okay, Fawzan. What are you asking? Look at the way at which people speak. I'm not asking you this. I'm sorry, man. Shama kijiye, Prabhu, shama kijiye. Right, so was Abu Talib saved as some of the companion? I've answered this previously about Abu Talib. I do believe that Abu Talib radiallahu an was kind of saved. That's my understanding, my inclination, and I've got a more detailed response previously. You can search that and check it up. Do you believe that man landed on the moon? Or did the moon land on man? Man landed on the moon. Of course, people have landed on the moon, for God's sake. You know, I understand whether the Americans faked it initially or not. That's one discussion because of the space wars and the space race going on between Russia and America. So I understand that. But as to now have people reach the moon, it's ridiculous and preposterous to think they haven't. Just look at the technology around you, for God's sake. We are on the verge of perhaps having soon quantum computers. Artificial intelligence is so incredibly intelligent. I mean, it's so incredibly groundbreaking, that area is. And that's artificial intelligence in our day and age. And that's our day and age right now. And of course they've landed on the moon, God damn it. Right, so whilst people are still tuning in, this Sunday there was the United Muslims Convention or Conference or UMC, so I attended that. I'll just give some brief kind of flashbacks about. As always, it's great to kind of like go to these gatherings, meet people. Always an opportunity to also meet the imams, the speakers, people like that. Sometimes get a bit of that chit chat going, understand what people are up to. So that's always kind of great. Alhamdulillah, people like Imam Siraj Wahaj were there, who really is one of the most, I think he has that undisputed, I don't just mean from age, but that seniority in respect, really. And people, you know, you can see that around him as well. And he's somebody who carries, in my understanding, a lot of wisdom. Carries a lot of wisdom with him. You know, may Allah bless him, preserve him, allow us to benefit from him, Ameen. And he's somebody who's always had this consistency about him. And I like, I mean, I really do like that and appreciate it. He's not been somebody that's been so much into the academic side of things or the ilmi side of things. He's not so concerned about, you know, masail or fiqh, but just about the consistent, steadfast nature of this deen. And that you've got to kind of salute him for that, you know, because decades later he's still like that. MashaAllah, may Allah bless him. So there were other people as well. I mean, there were some scholars, visiting scholars, reciters from South Africa. It was great to meet them. There was a Sheikh Muhammad Dini from, I think he said Ohio, in America. Seemed like an amazing person. I really wanted to delve into more kind of deep discussions with him, but time didn't really permit. So that was all good. I met Sheikh Hassan Ali. That was interesting. You know, the interesting thing was a little while back, those of you that remember, there was all this drama about people getting really so shocked that I broke the news. I didn't break the news. It was already there, but that Jesus is not coming back. There is no second coming of Jesus Christ. Peace and blessings be upon him. So this really shocked people. Some people. I mean, I wasn't the first person to say this, but obviously these people were a bit surprised by it, and you had all these kind of refutations and all these people speaking out against me. Now, during that time, Sheikh Hassan Ali was one of the people, and I generally have a principle that as long as somebody, generally speaking, does not openly attack me in public and try to kind of be rude to me, then to the best of my ability, I will not be, as a principle, I will not be I will always try to show respect to that person. So as long as they don't publicly, if they publicly kind of malign me and personally attack me, then it's fair game. Then there's no holds barred. Okay, so it's just straight. So Sheikh Hassan Ali had done a video. He was one of the people that did a video against me at that time. And the interesting thing is, he was, I actually mentioned at that time that Sheikh Hassan Ali, I do know him in a very respectful light. So I'm going to show him respect, and I'm not going to kind of be out of tone with him. So that was in my response to him. And then he made a counter response where, if I'm going to be honest, it was just out of character, because I was showing him respect in my response, and he just made a response by just making personal attacks, and that too false attacks against me. And so, and And I just thought, wow, like I was a bit, I thought, okay, I'm trying to be nice. This is it, isn't it? The world, there's that poet says that, "Mujhe zindagi ka itna tajraba to nahi," that I don't have that much experience of this world, पर इतना जानता हूँ सादगी में लोग जीने नहीं देते. If you try to be simple, people just do not let you live in this world. So I thought, here's me being so nice to this sheikh, saying, he came to the Midlands, I drove him around, I dropped him off many years back, and I have respect for him, and he's personally attacking me for no reason. I just thought, wow. So I met him, and needless to say, I think there was the sheikh was a bit bit anxious, and it's amazing how anxious the sheikh was whether I was recording all of this. And I made it clear that, look, I'm not. Relax yourself. I'm not recording things. So anyway, we had a very intense conversation, and my point was very straight. I don't know what the sheikh was going on about certain things, alleged these faults. People say you misquote, you do this. So I asked him, give me one example of a misquote, and he obviously said, I don't know any from. So I said, well, there you go. But I said, that's irrelevant. My point was simple. I said, you can disagree with me, you can critique my views, you can criticize my opinions, you can call me my opinions off the track or whatever. But why were you personally attacking me when I was being very respectful to you? And we had a very kind of an interesting and an intense conversation, actually. And he said that he acknowledged, alhamdulillah, that was actually wrong of him. He shouldn't have actually done that. And I said, well, fine. I said, the rest of it, I don't really care. I mean, I said, as far as my opinions go, fine, you can refute my opinions. And I said, any day, I am ready for a dialogue. Any day that you pick a topic that you feel that I've got one of my problematic issues, I'm ready. Let's have a dialogue. And then this was another thing, you see, like the sheikh said, I'll have a dialogue with you, but nobody can be present, nobody can record it, we can't record it, nothing, can't audio record it, and can't even be a single person in the room. I was like, yeah, salam. But still, I'm still ready anyway, nevertheless. So that's my main point, that, if people are respectful to you, then you ought to be respectful back. And definitely for a responsible person not to be making false kind of, false digs and stuff like that. Nevertheless, put that aside. But it was good to meet him, as always. I did say, you see, I think it got to a point where the sheikh said, well, okay, what do you want now? I said, Chalo ab jaane do, just give me a hug and off you go. I said, that's it. It's all right. What's past is past. Huh? So, but moving on, it's interesting. I met some other people there. I met some, some people, the debates that they get into, Islamic debates, yeah, they don't know hardly anything about Islam. I'm talking about just regular, some practicing people. So I bumped into somebody at this event. He wasn't a sheikh, but maybe he doesn't consider himself a sheikh, but he may think he knows a certain amount of Islam. First time I'm meeting this person. And he starts having this discussion about, I believe in this in Islam, and I believe in the Quran and the Sunnah, and I believe in Ijma', and I believe in... He obviously knew about me, and so I said, okay, that's interesting. And he said, well, I believe that... I said, when you say Ijma', what are we talking about? He said, like, there's certain things which this whole ummah has agreed upon. And if anybody disagrees with them, then they are a kafir. So I was like, whoa. I was like, wow, all right. I like that stance, huh? Straight away, kafir. So below kufr, we don't even, that's the least, that's the minimum benchmark we begin from, kafir. So I said, like what? What would you be, as an example? So he said, like the hijab. I was like, Allah. He goes, like the hair covering. So he said, for a woman to uncover her hair in front of a non-mahram, this ummah has agreed upon this issue. So the likes of Javed Ghamidi from Pakistan, who said that the hijab, the head covering, is not an obligation, he said, to me, he is a murtad, from his words, from the murtaddeen, from the kuffar. Allah, people of religion, huh? What they've done to this deen, ya salam. There's that, I came across this poem where he said, Kabe mein to Musalman ko bhi kafir keh dete hain. That at the Kaaba, they even declare Muslims to be kafir. Mein khane mein to kafir ko bhi nahi kafir kehte. It's like that way, anyway, in the poem he's saying that where they kind of drink, he says here we don't even call a kafir. But anyway, so I said, wow, I said, you don't think that's a bit harsh to declare somebody like that, to state he's a kafir? He said, no. He said, anybody who disagrees with this is a kafir. So I said, okay, what have they agreed upon? He said that they've agreed that the woman cannot show any of her hair to a non-mahram. So I said, okay. I said, so what about Imam Malik when he said that a woman can uncover her hair in front of her slave? So he said, okay. He said, okay, well, exclude this part of this ruling. So in front of slaves, that's okay. I said, yeah, but nobody else said. He said, yeah, okay, but we'll exclude this part. So I said, okay. I said, what about the father-in-law? What do you think about the father-in-law? Can the woman uncover in front of the father-in-law? So he goes, well, no. So I said, well, Imam Malik said she could uncover her hair in front of the father-in-law. He goes, well, okay, we'll exclude this as well. That, so she can't cover it in front of any other men, or the slave, or the father-in-law. So I said, so what do you think about the son-in-law? I said, because Imam Malik said she can uncover the hair in front of the son-in-law. So he said, well, okay, so we'll exclude the slave, the father-in-law, the son-in-law. I said, don't you think it's going to be easier if we just exclude Imam Malik? I said, isn't that going to just make life easier? That we just... What did he know anyway? Push him aside. Ridiculous, People, they don't know anything about Islam. I'm telling you. They go on. Anyway, trying to chuck people out of Islam. Ya salam, ya salam. So, I want to deal with some some issues of some ex-Muslims, some objections and criticisms that they've raised. So I'll go through that. I've had some videos sent to me, and I've kind of watched them. So I'm going to discuss that in a while. I'll go through it. Oh, before that, people, all right, fan mail. No, I got this, I'd spoken about this previously. There's a friend, Facebook friend, who'd sent me this, he sent me a gift, and he'd sent me this message, and although I had thanked him previously, I didn't get to read his message. So I thought, I came across it just this weekend, and I thought, subhanAllah, I should have read that out, and I'd like to kind of take the opportunity to read it out. So, just part of it anyway. So, this is a message from Indra, who'd sent a gift of, I'm not sure if we're going to pronounce it correctly, from Indonesia, who'd sent something, a batik, I'm not sure how we pronounce it, but it was a gift of a kind of cloth garment material. But with that, he'd sent this message. And first of all, being very grateful, he said that, look, I can't think of any other way to thank you. I know you said once on your Monday nights that we don't have to give you any gift, huh? Unless it's in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. No, he never said that. But he's saying, but I just want to show my gratitude. I want you to know that somewhere out there, far away from Birmingham, far away from the European continent, there's at least one person who received a great benefit from your work. Whatever I do, I won't be able to thank you enough. I can only pray, may Allah Azza wa Jal pour you and your family and those close to your heart His endless rahmah, barakah, hasana and ni'mah in this dunya. I won't waste your time with all my story. I just want you to know that you saved me from becoming an ex-convert. Yes, not becoming an ex-Muslim, but from becoming an ex-convert. I converted, then somewhere along the way I felt tricked. I started to think, what kind of religion is this? Then I found you. You made me understand. You made me able to see the beauty of this deen. You have a crazy sense of humor, jokes and laughter. Keep it up. That's all I can say. And a huge thanks for Shaban too. That's Muhammad Shaban from Facebook who made this happen. Right, so Jazakallah. So Indra, Hayyakallah, may Allah bless you. Seriously, these words, they touched my heart. Long live, man, long live. May Allah bless you and your family. It is amazing to sometimes, you know, I when I'm going through messages, I see some messages from people, and they are incredibly, deeply encouraging. So I kind of, you know, because sometimes you think to yourself, what is the point? I don't mean it in a bad way, but sometimes you do think, what is the point? I mean, it's not often, but on one of those days. But then things like this really make it worthwhile. So I think, Barakallahu feekum, Hayyakumullah. May Allah keep you smiling and forever happy. Right, so I'll take 1-2 questions. And then I'll focus on these objections and criticisms from some ex-Muslims, including the objection that did Allah make a mistake in Surah Nisa of the Quran. So, there's Indra on the... Alright. So, idolatry is that of a pedestal. I'm not sure what that means. Imran Khan. Alright. Shukran. Barakallahu feek. Hayyakumullah. Not allowed to marry Arab women other than madhabs. Why are Arab men not allowed to marry Arab women in other madhabs? Arab men are allowed to marry non-Arab women. I don't understand what that means. Oh, are you talking about the fiqhi position? Now, some ulama in fiqh came up with an understanding that in marriage there ought to be kafa'a, which is like compatibility. Now, what does compatibility mean? They disagreed. So Imam Malik said the compatibility was in deen. Some people said it was in social status. And then some people said it was in lineage. And so if you're an Arab, then a non-Arab is somehow below you. I thought, well, that's obviously ridiculous and stupid. How on earth is a non-Arab below an Arab? Right, so I don't know where that part of the deen came from, because the Prophet and the Quran is very clear on the fact that we are all the children of Adam, and there is no difference between us. So, but you're right, and the Hanafi madhab does have that as well. So it considers like the Arabs better than the non-Arabs, and then it considers the Quraysh better than the rest of the Arabs, and then it considers the Hashemeen better than Quraysh, and the Sayyids, and Sayyids are somehow very special because of all of this. Obviously, to me, all of that is, needless to say, nonsense. And Imam Malik clearly denounced any of this stuff and said that the compatibility is only in matters of deen. That's it. That said, I mean, culture can have its own value. I mean, I'm not trying to say that culture and things like that are not important. They are, but it doesn't belittle another person. Sure, it doesn't mean you have to marry. Look, people, it's not like people can have preferences. That's not like degrading people. Like somebody could say, I like people of a particular culture, or maybe of their own culture, or they like people of a particular ethnicity, or that's not to say belittle other people. But if you start to say they are above, or we are above other people, then that's un-Islamic and wrong. Okay, so Asda have got an offer on Iron Brew. Okay, thanks. Right, so what else are we looking at? Let's take 1-2 questions. And then, people, we will start looking at some of these attacks on Islam. Is cannabis haram and an intoxicant? Cannabis is not really an intoxicant. It may be kind of like a relaxant. It doesn't really intoxicate in the way alcohol intoxicates. In my understanding, I've got a more detailed response on YouTube. You can watch that. Cannabis and things like this are not, in my understanding, haram. They are discouraged. That's to differentiate from the cannabis culture of drug dealing and all of that stuff is haram, because that stuff is totally separate and it involves it involves crime, it involves just a whole dark world, really. I'm not talking about those things, they are haram, but I'm speaking about cannabis per se. So if it were not to be a matter of legality, so in the UK, I think right now there is some discussion about bringing in medical marijuana. I believe the Home Secretary signed off for an individual case where some British young person had gone to America, he came back and they seized whatever little medical marijuana he had, and then his health deteriorated, and then he got a special license from the Home Office saying he can use marijuana. Now, obviously, once you do that, it sets a precedent. Now there's a discussion. So legality aside, I think it is, the thing per se is not necessarily, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, but I think it's actually, this is my understanding and I could be wrong, I think in its pure sense, not the one that's all laced with other chemicals, I would imagine, and I've never smoked, I mean, I don't smoke. I have, obviously everybody's probably smoked at some point in their life, but I don't smoke. I think as a teenager I tried with great effort to smoke, but it just never settled with me. I just could never like the taste. So, alhamdulillah, so Allah saved me, right? But in its purer form, I think it would be less harmful than tobacco. And I could be wrong, but there's documentaries on Netflix and stuff like that, and on, that which have research into that. That said, I think there's an interesting question. If medical marijuana, let's say, comes in, or in those parts of the world where actual marijuana, like in America, where it's sold in certain states like Colorado, I think, and other states, I think it's really interesting that the law ought to then look into all those criminal cases of those poor people that were in the past imprisoned or may still be in prison based on marijuana, and yet now they allow corporations to do the same thing and earn millions. That's just, I think that's the kind of like the evil side of corporatism that we see today. I think this is utterly unacceptable. That is the opposite of justice. So I think that these things really, there ought to be some kind of something about that. Anyway, let's take a look at some of these questions. Is there any one, two before we go in? Intoxication is when you're not aware. Exactly. Tell me about it. I wouldn't recommend, no, neither would I recommend cannabis. I don't recommend these things. Let me make that very clear. I don't recommend. But just because I don't like or I don't support or doesn't mean God declared it haram. What I'm doing is differentiating between us and God. Not everything that we think is bad, we have to rubber stamp it with God. That's what I'm saying. Right. The parting of the sea, I want to go through that in great detail at some point, all the kind of miracles of Moses. But the parting of the sea, it's interesting, took place, as it seems, that evidence seems to show. There were generally three prominent kind of theories that we come across that explain the parting of the Red Sea. I mean, the first side question, why do we call it the Red Sea? Should have it been called the Reed Sea? But it seems it was the Red Sea because of the mount at the Gulf of Aqaba. You get these kind of the red mountains and the reflection that they give off. It actually makes it look red. So that seems most likely that the Gulf of Aqaba is the Red Sea, because there is the Gulf of Suez as well, and so there's some research into which was the point at which Moses crossed. And it seems it was the Gulf of Aqaba, and what you get sometimes are, you get something called like an uptide caused by excessive wind pressure. So if you look into the actual Bible, now the Quran speaks very briefly of Moses and the sea being parted for him. It's just a few verses saying, like go like this, strike the sea, and then the Lord kind of parted the sea. But in the Bible, it goes into much more detail about, it says that an eastern wind blew, and the Lord blew from his nostrils, and an eastern wind blew all night over the Red Sea, and the Lord pushed back through the entire night the Red Sea until it was up like a wall. And you find that in the book of Exodus and in some of the other books. Now, what you do get is you get this up until now even, like if you get a strong upstream wind coming from the Gulf of the Gulf of Aqaba, it will push back the water depending on the pressure of the wind. Now, what's interesting is, if there was a hurricane, and it has been documented, so several historians and other people have documented when they've been present at the Gulf of Aqaba and there's been a hurricane, and how it's actually pushed back for quite excessively. It's pushed back the entire water. And what it actually does is it pushes it, and it actually raises the water. The hurricane does. It does like a wall, quite astonishingly. And depending on, so there's been a lot of research done into this. So if the wind, for example, the hurricane, if it had winds of speeds of, like, let's say 80 miles per hour, which is very reasonable, it could have pushed the Gulf of Aqaba, the sea, the kind of water there, to anything between 600, 700, 800 yards back. It could have easily done that. And it's interesting that when the wind stops, how research will show, and even actual events, the water just gushes forth. So it's interesting. So that seems to be what had actually happened. And it was a natural phenomenon. But obviously we believe that that God allowed these mechanisms to take place like that. That's the difference, okay? So just to kind of clarify, The other theories were amongst them. There were two. One of a kind of tsunami that may have taken place around the Mediterranean or somewhere there, that underwater and that kind of. But this, looking into it, it doesn't seem to hold the validity, because the timings once again don't seem to add up so well. And the other is the a volcano eruption of Santorini. That could have taken place, and then that caused a certain kind of a counter effect. But once again, the eruption of Santorini, the dates that we find today don't seem to tie in too well with what would most likely be the dates of the Exodus. So it seems after research that that is what I am content with, that this is what happened. And I would say that it's important that we do go with natural explanations, because it seems very clear that this is what was happening. And plus, this makes the deen very real for people. Okay? Because to say to people otherwise, that no, there were no natural, it's just one day. First of all, that's not how it's described in the Bible, definitely. In the Bible, it goes through much detail in saying that it took an entire night for the sea to part. That overnight. And that a wind from the east pushed forth and so on. Now, which ties in very well with the Gulf of Aqaba, because that's where the wind is actually, it's kind of northeastern, because the ancient people just used 4 directions. They never used to use the middle directions. So, but because alternatively, what we are saying to people, like let's say today you take somebody like, I don't know, like let's say a poor child, an innocent child suffering in Palestine, or somebody in Burma, or somebody in Kashmir, or somebody in anywhere where there could be some kind of like, whether atrocities or whether they're human or natural kind of suffering around the world. And what we're saying to them, in essence, is, oh, today, yeah, God isn't going to do anything miraculous to save you, but had of you been 3,000 years ago one of a child from the Israelites, then God would have bended the laws of nature to have made, everything possible to have saved you. But today, God forbid, like he will not do anything. Today you must look up to the United Nations or other kind of means to intervene and save you. So this becomes it becomes also a cause for despair. So it's important that we give the right narrative to people. Okay, so that's, could the sea parting be folklore? I don't believe it is. I don't believe it is folklore. Because it kind of, if you look into how the description of just the Exodus is given, the kind of detail it gives is shockingly kind of, upon experimentation, valid. Even to the extent of where they went. I mean, if you believe it to be not the Sinai Peninsula, but northwest Arabia, that's where Jabal al-Tur was, what is today Jabal al-Badr, which was a volcano, and you will see that along the way that is where the Midianite kind of people roamed. Even today, archaeological findings of Midianite pottery is found there. The people of Midian, where Moses was married into. So he knew that kind of region, and he knew those people, and it makes sense. And you have findings there of all of this. So it does tie in. It's too much to have just been totally made up. Right, so, people, let's put that aside. Let's, do converts need to get circumcised? Snip, snip. Well, I don't know about need, but it's a general it's kind of emphasized mainly under things like hygiene in Islam and a sense of a natural state. This is what it's kind of defined as a fitrah. And the natural state, because it ties in with hygiene. That's I don't feel it's an obligation that they, if they don't do it, but it is strongly recommended as long as there's no medical or physical reasons to prevent it. Oh, wa alaikum assalam, amani, ahlan wa sahlan, hola. Who are the hadith rejectors? I don't know who the hadith rejectors are. Right, so let's take a look at some of these. Gotta stretch out, people. Let's take a look at some of these objections we've had. Can I talk about halala? Halala. making people halal. Halala, those of you that don't know, is when a wife wants to remarry. So some Muslims have come up with this misconstrued understanding of Islam that she must marry another man to go back with the first husband. And it's nothing but a misrepresentation of the Quran. And he must, this new husband must have, the new husband must have sex with her. I mean, would it even be a marriage if there was no sex involved? Would it even be halal? It can't just be halal, it must be halalan tayyiban. It must be halal and good. I don't know if does that also depend on the quality of it? The quality of the sexual encounter must also be good. People, huh? If there were ever jobs going like that, we are looking for a halala consultant. Everybody would. That's where I would be in my. I'd be, yes, of course I can. What can I bring to this field? Well, I have a portfolio of experience that. May I share with you some of my DVDs? This is many of my great Oscar-nominated performances, people. And God, if that was a job, huh? That would be like a dream job for guys, wouldn't it? It'd be like... And then the fake sincerity that would come with it. It'd be like, I only do this for the sake of Allah. I don't know about you, but I only do this with the worry of this ummah in mind. It's nonsense, people. I've got a more detailed video explaining, look, what the talaq was really about. And this halala thing is misconstrued. And even if a person's given 3 talaqs, look, use the other rulings. They are there for safeguarding. You don't need to be saying... People don't need to be doing halalas. Okay, so... Unless, of course, I do get the job, then I will be advertising. Of course, do halala, people. Let's take a look at some of these questions, man. But, in all honesty, we don't do ourselves any favors, do we, as Muslims? We really have damaged this deen beyond repair, to some extent. Alright, so... ex-Muslims, alright. People, apostates. Nah, I'm only kidding. Am I? Everybody get your stones ready. We're gonna stone the apostate. I'm just joking. Any ex-Muslims watching this, relax. Relajado, people. Tranquilo. Right, so this is... Right, so I've been sent certain videos. Now, I do follow certain ex-Muslims. So I do watch time to time certain videos from them, and I try to learn about what are the concerns that ex-Muslims have, and sometimes it's interesting for me because I won't know, you know, they might come up with a ruling that I might think, oh wow, I never really thought of that, and I'll have to look into it. So somebody's asking about male piercings. Yes, they are allowed, and you can watch my clip on that. It's on YouTube. Right, but let's stay focused. Right, so ex-Muslims or people who've left Islam, known the word murtad. Don't you think the word murtad just has that, it has that oomph in it, doesn't it? Murtad. Al-murtad. These murtaddin. It just has that Murtad means apostate. Yeah, somebody who's abandoned the faith. But coming back, being serious, right? Okay, so I do follow several ex-Muslims, and I have kind of in time, you know, time to time been in touch with a few amongst them, and always kind of respectful. And I'm going to be honest, I actually have a very compassionate spot or a part in my heart, a place in my heart, a compassionate place in my heart for ex-Muslims. And I've said before as well that, look, just leave ex-Muslims alone. Just stop kind of trolling them, stop kind of intimidating them, threatening them, stop abusing them, just leave them alone. And the reason I have this kind of spot in my, or this place in my heart for them, is because I feel in many ways they are people who have, maybe they've truly grappled with religion. Not all of them, but many amongst them. I feel that they are people who actually thought deeply about religion. And that was their outcome, that they weren't content with Islam. And then I see sometimes the suffering they go through, or the suffering they've been through. And who are we to question? Because it's easy to, you know, sit back and chill. But then when you see people that have actually gone through suffering, it's, you know, like, how can we, like, it's easy for me to say, for example, oh, it's a test from God, it's a test from God. But for the person who's actually undergoing, you know, like, let's say you're some little boy who's a Christian, he's been repeatedly, I don't know, raped by the priests and stuff like this, and whilst growing up, and then always told, you know, like, seen a hypocrisy, or the same thing with Muslims, or you've seen your family get abused, or you've been abused, or you've just felt loss upon loss and suffering, and like, can we easily brush off that as just saying for them, like, oh, it's a test? I'm not saying it's not a test, but what I'm saying is, for the person to live that experience, they encounter a certain amount of despair. And who are we to kind of say anything about that? Like, to you know, it's like that slogan that was written in the death camps by the Jews, in the Nazi death camps, that if there is a God, he must beg my forgiveness. And, you know, I once saw people making like horrible statements about that, and I thought, but the brink at which a human must have been driven, you know, to think and to, like, there's no empathy here. Like, people are not imagining what they're they're just thinking, why are you questioning God? So really, this is me, and it still is my message, that, look, just have respect, give these people space. So that said, I do follow certain things to kind of learn what they're going through, but I've had a few videos sent to me which I watched, Now, I will highlight at this point something about ex-Muslims, and I want to say on the back of the flip side of that is, look, it's very understandable that when you face, and I face a lot of hate online, when you face a lot of hate, it's easy to become quite reactionary, and the same could be said about me. Maybe I mock people, I do things, and which I'm always turning things into a joke and stuff. But I would say, look, and it's ironic that I refer them to at least a message or this verse in the Quran, that لا يجرمنكم شنعان قوم على ألا تعدلوا. That just the meaning of this. Well, I know they wouldn't accept the Quran, but do not let the enmity between you and a people lead you to being unjust. Like, just because I don't like people, or I don't like a particular people, don't let that bias me. Don't let it kind of prejudice my thought against them, that I kind of turn away from being just and objective. Because there's many ex-Muslims who are very, I think they have a lot of valid points in some of the things they say, the concerns anyway they've raised. But there's some who have just become so bitter, and some atheists as well, that they, I actually used to, and I still, I actually watch a lot of things from atheists. I try to learn from what they're saying. I try to understand their concerns. I try to be objective. I'm not saying I'm necessarily open-minded, but I'd like to believe I am to some extent open-minded to acknowledging certain arguments. And I've seen this happen to some atheists, some like people like Sam Harris, who I think in the beginning had very powerful, cogent arguments, and then I think in the last maybe 2 years or 3, became a bit extremely bitter, unfortunately, against Muslims, supporting nuking Muslims or attacking, things like. And I'm not saying that certain ex-Muslims are going to that extent, but I'm just saying that being weary of becoming bitter. Don't let this, even if you're smiling, but from within that bitterness pours out. There's a poem that كل ومهما تكن عند امرئ من خليقة, that whatever a person has hidden within, وَإِنْ خَالَهَا تَخْفَى عَلَى النَّاسِ تُعْلَمِ, that and even if he felt that it would be hidden from people, it will still pour out. That these inner emotions, and that's from a Jahiliyyah, pre-Islamic poetry, that the bitterness comes through in some of these videos. And sometimes I watched 1, 2 of these, and I'll be honest with you, I, as an open-minded person, it was a bit difficult to kind of watch some of these, because it was, even though it was being said with a smile and it was being said, but there was a lot of I could see a poisoned sense of just trying to poison the listeners into a certain thing about Islam. And don't get me wrong, be fair. I will try to be fair about some of these criticisms that have been raised, but just be wary about that, because if you're not going to be just, you're betraying your own cause. You're betraying your own, and this is I can just only imagine the reaction. And I know people will say, well, I don't care how people are going to react, but if you're going to be unjust in your thing, and you're going to maybe lie, maybe unknowingly lie, or unknowingly present falsehood as false things as Islamic, and then break them down, then that isn't the way to do things. But okay, I'll tackle some of these interesting questions. One question I saw, this was an important one, it said that, look, why we don't know Islam to be true. So some person had said, we don't know Islam to be true, as in the truth. So therefore, I will only follow what I know to be true, the truth. I want the truth. God damn it. Why is that? You can't handle the truth. But the thing is that this argument that we don't know with certainty Islam to be true, that statement is accurate. It is a faith. But I will ask something. I will ask something at this point. And this, by the way, this message of mine is to all people. It's to ex-Muslims, atheists, it's to Muslims, it's to people of any faith and no faith. When you say truth, what does that mean? What does truth mean? And if you're going to say, I mean by that something that is absolutely categorically real in front of me, like this is real, corporal, it's embodied as a reality, I'm going to put aside all the philosophical discussions of like, idealism, and I don't like, because that to me just sounds like you're trying to wow some listeners and you're not really being real. And but there's all the non-foundationalism arguments and all this about, well, that in itself is a belief and how do you prove that and so on, which are because I love philosophy, but I'm going to put that aside. I'm not going to even go at it from that angle at all. Not that I can't. I can, and I know those arguments become unanswerable to some extent, but I want to be real with these people. I agree that religion as a whole can you prove it to be true, like as in real? You can't. It's but just a story. I accept. But then I ask you, and I want you to ponder over this, that is not almost everything in our human world but a psychosocial construct? Is it not a story that we have in our minds? Like, just be honest with me. Like, let's take something like very fundamental as human rights. Human rights is just a story. We've come up with it. What makes you think a human has more rights than a chicken? There's nothing. What makes you think a human has more rights than a stone? We chose that humans would. And this, like, Yuval Harari kind of really stresses this point in his book Sapiens as well, that there's no real thing as human rights. We've come up with them. It's just a story. They're not real. They're not truths. There's no such thing as like freedoms. We've come up with them. It's a story. There's no such thing as money. Money is just a psychosocial narrative. It's just a story that we have. I'm just being honest. It is a story. Race is a story. Nationality is a story. Governance is a story. Who said anybody has the right to rule over another person at all? Who said there is such thing as good or bad in this world? It is a story. Human beings have come up with this story. That who says doing anything is bad or doing anything is good? It is but just a story. And don't get me wrong, I too agree with these stories. I agree with these stories. I'm not dismissing these stories. I am with these stories, but they are, through the voice of reason, they are just stories. What's to say that, look, these are just discourses. They are just narratives that human beings have come up with. Hence, when Wittgenstein said that even if a lion could speak English, you would never understand him and he could never understand you, because what he was saying is your world is made up of social stories, of constructs. The concept of possession, that this is my glass, who said that? It's just a story. If I take it out of your hand, is it now mine? The relationships, the institution of marriage, it is just a story. It doesn't really exist. It's in the minds of people. Let's just be honest. What is true? If we want to be real, this universe is it's silent, it's soundless. I mean, it's odorless. It's insipid. It's colorless. That's reality. But that could be argued at a different level. That okay, that's how we perceive things. But I don't even want to go into that. That's scientific. But I don't even want to go there. I'm speaking about stories. Is it not all a story? And so religion too is a story. I accept that. But why is it that, like, just because you can't prove something to be corporal, as in real in front of you, tangible, that it then doesn't hold that value of a reality? Because for people, is money not real? Of course, money is just a story we made up as human beings. So this is what, even the understanding of right and wrong is a story. We just made this story up. And I'm with this story. I mean, who said that governments have a right to rule people? Who said that? Why do government? Did you opt in? You know, this social theory, whether you want to go with Hobbes or other people. Like, who said, who agreed to this? These are just stories that we as human beings came up with. And yes, I too am with these stories. But what I'm trying to say is that none of these stories have a reality beyond our minds. We have invented them. Maybe they are real. Some would like to believe they are. I'd like to believe human rights is real. I do believe it's real. I believe as faith, but in reality, as a truth, it doesn't exist. So I want to answer that. That's to people who say, because religion isn't real, it isn't true, as in truth meaning something real that I can, as evident and embodied kind of thing in front of me. Neither is most of the world as you know it, my friend. But just because you've been deluded or you've accepted that it is. And so my point is that that is not enough to dismiss religion. Yes, no, don't get me wrong. It's enough for you as a personal choice to dismiss religion. I accept that. But to say that all religion must be absurd because it is not. No, because the concept of absurdity is something we've just made up. And this comes to us through reason. So I just wanted to highlight that point, and I'm not trying to, this isn't a kind of conundrum or a riddle I'm presenting to people. I'm being very real, and atheists have acknowledged this. It isn't something I'm coming up with. You read this in the book. It's amazing how people stress these factors, like the book I gave as an example of Dr. Yuval Harari or other people. This is a known reality. Okay, let's take a look at, I'll move on to another contention. So I hope that sheds some light on people saying, I don't want to accept religion because it can't be proved as real. That in itself, that's fine as your choice, but it's not enough to say all religion must be ridiculous because it can't be proved to be real, because it is a psychosocial narrative, but then so is almost everything that you value in this world, right? Everything that you value, because it's just a psychosocial narrative. It's a part of an imaginative realm that we've come up with ideas. Right, so okay, next I want to focus on, I looked at, now somebody saying, is there something universal as good? Now, you see, there is as part of this story. Do you understand? That it depends how many layers we want to strip away. If you want to go right down to the animal kingdom, as we are just animals, because we fundamentally are just creatures, then what's to say? I mean, is one animal killing another bad, cruel, evil? Is it? I mean, for us, we can now, because we've got layers of society and these psychosocial narratives to say yes or no. But how many layers do you want to strip away? That's what I'm saying. Right, so, okay, another video I took a look at, and this was quite interesting. This was to say that Allah made a mistake in the Quran. Somebody saying about Jordan Peterson who's coming to Birmingham. Okay, I've heard quite a bit about Jordan Peterson. I've watched 1-2 of his things, and I liked one, two of his things. He really leans in on psychology and stuff like this. But I don't know. I am curious why Muslims have turned him into a sheikh. He's like so rated by like Muslims, and I'm surprised because I don't think he really respects Islam much. Not that that's a problem, but I'm just saying, I'm seeing like hardline Muslims, they really rate him so much, like they share all his videos and everything, just because he kind of like, let's say, disses women or does stuff like this, or, disses them in an academic sense, or something like this. Which, don't get me wrong, I'm all for sense of humor and all of that kind of stuff, but I'm surprised how he's taken a allama status. Like, Muslims think he's now the, like, all hardcore Muslim, these hardline, who would never share anything of other Muslims that are liberal, that they call liberal, but they share people's things who surprisingly wouldn't even like Islam, who would see Islam as just another form of bigotry. But I'm surprised that they consider him to the extent that he was, I heard, invited to, I think, the RIS event, the Reviving the Islamic Spirit event. And I think he declined, or I don't know, and I'm thinking, well, you've had non-Muslims like Noam Chomsky amongst us, who, they legends, living legends, who Muslims have unfortunately failed in taking great opportunity, benefit from, and yet they, just because he, disses things like, I don't know, homosexuality or women on a few occasions, or I don't know, like, Muslims sometimes surprise me, they baffle me. Don't get me wrong, I some of the things I've watched, I haven't watched too many things of Jordan Peterson, but some of the things I've watched, they were good, I liked them, but I'm just saying, I'm surprised at the status that these Muslims have given him. Right, so now there's a question or a criticism raised by some ex-Muslims and some atheists, that Allah made a mistake in Surah Nisa, verse 95. Now, this verse is to do with those people who go out as part of the Muslim expedition to fight. And this was... Now, first of all, I want to make it clear that you can investigate. This is not for me. You can investigate the seerah of the Prophet. The Prophet's battles are well documented, and you can look at the authentic sources. The Prophet himself, during his lifetime, all of the battles that the Prophet participated in were always as a reaction to a threat. They were, and that's not just me making that up, that's actually it. So they were, whether the threat was that people had broken a treaty, or that they were actually advancing, or they were setting up, or they had set up encampment, and then the Muslims went out. So just to clarify that point. Now, there's a verse in the Quran that that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about, that la yastawi al-qa'iduna min al-mu'minina, that those who choose to sit and not participate in battle, they are not equal to those who go out, like the mujahideen bi amwalihim wa anfusihim, that those who go out and sacrifice even their lives or their wealth. فضل الله المجاهدين على القاعدين, darja, that Allah has kind of raised those who go out and participate above those who choose to sit behind and not participate, a kind of status and fadlan Allah speaks about in this verse of the Quran. Now, there's several narrations now that have been highlighted that mainly come down to Bara ibn Azib radiyallahu an, a companion. And this story is a false story, but I'm going to tell you the story first. The story highlights that the Prophet, when this verse was revealed, and I'll go with the Abu Dawood narration, which I think these people are mainly basing it on, which has a lot of detail in it. So the other ones are there as well, but it's very descriptive in Abu Dawood. And Ibn Maktum, who is a blind companion, is sitting behind the Prophet. Now people say whether his name was Amr ibn that's what is commonly known as Amr ibn Maktum. Some people say it's Abdullah ibn Maktum. Either way, he's a blind companion, and he was sitting there, and this verse was revealed. Now, when it was revealed, the verse said, "La yastawi al-qa'iduna min al-mu'minina," that these people are not equivalent to those who go out and participate in battle. And then what happened is, as this is happening, the Prophet said to Zayd, that can somebody call Zayd? So they call Zayd. He comes, and the Prophet says to him, "Bring me a bone to write this verse on this bone, or some kind of like a lawh, some kind of like a slate or something that we can write this on." And he says, okay. Now, whilst this is happening, sorry, just one moment, I'm bringing this up. Right, so whilst this is happening, Ibn Maktum says, "Ya Rasulullah, what about me? Because I would go out on jihad, I would participate, but I'm blind." So then what happens is the Prophet sits down and he says, "Wait," and there's more revelation coming. And in this revelation now, the same verse is revealed, except it has a clause in this. So now the verse is revealed again right there, and the verse then says, "La yastawi al-qa'iduna min al-mu'minina ghayru uli ad-darar," except those who have some kind of disability. وَالْمُجَاهِدُونَ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ, and those who go out بِأَمْوَالِهِمْ وَأَنفُسِهِمْ فَضَّلَ اللَّهُ الْمُجَاهِدِينَ بِأَمْوَالِهِمْ وَأنفُسِهِمْ عَلَى الْقَاعِدِينَ دَرَجَةً وَكُلًّا وَعَدَ اللَّهُ الْحُسْنَى, and all Allah has promised good to. وَفَضَّلَ اللَّهُ الْمُجَاهِدِينَ عَلَى الْقَاعِدِينَ أَجْرًا عَظِيمًا, although Allah has definitely graced those who go out and fight more. Now, the thing is that here they said, well, obviously Allah ought to know that there's a blind person sitting there. So Allah ought to reveal this verse in its entirety. Why reveal it like this? Now that's a good objection if this be true. Now, this narration, by the way, which is mainly based on Al-Bara ibn Azib, radiallahu an, there are some other narrations from some other, but this is the main one. There's at least almost 16 transmissions of this in books like Bukhari, Muslim, Ahmad, Ad-Darmi, Tirmidhi, all these kind of books. Now, all of them seem to come through one narrator. They come through Abu Ishaq as-Sabi'i, whose name is Amr ibn Abdullah al-Kufi al-Hamdani. Now, Abu Ishaq as-Sabi'i in most of these narrations declares these as an, like he doesn't say that he actually heard. Now in some he does say, but in so many he's saying he didn't. But this person himself, Abu Ishaq as-Sabi'i, he has been problematized by people. He's by the way an excessive narrator. He's one of the major ports. He's like a powerhouse of narrations. He's like Zuhri in that sense. Although he's a teacher of Zuhri, he's from Kufa, but he is like Zuhri in excessive transmission of hadith. Now, Ibn Hibban, Shu'bah, Bayhaqi, Ibn Hajar said he was known for tadlis. Like, these are amongst the scholars that have said that. Another thing, other scholars like Abu Zur'a, Imam Ahmad, Ibn Hajar, they all accept that his memory messed up. Not only did it mess up, but he started to mix things up. That ikhtilat, what they call. Now, some people tried to say no, because the Sahihain, Bukhari and Muslim combined have about, I think 38 narrations or 30-something narrations of his. And you have a transmission from Mughira who says that, and Imam Ahmad transmits this as well, that ma afsada hadith Ahl al-Kufa, that the hadith of Ahl al-Kufa was not ruined except by two people, one al-A'mash and then Abu Ishaq as-Sabi'i. So when 16 narrations are coming through this person, and he lived to almost be 100 years old, you can see how old he was. So this is the source of the problem. And some people may say, well, And the Abu Dawood, what about some of the other narrations that come through some other people? Like the Abu Dawood one I narrated first comes through Abdurrahman ibn Abi Zinad, who is weak. He's weak. I mean, Ibn Muhriz, Ad-Dawri, these people clearly say he's da'if. And likewise, there are some other scattered narrations coming through Ibn Shihab, once again, who's problematic with Tadlis, saying an. And there's some through Ibn Jurayj, who's massively problematic with Tadlis. You see, the issue is, people, these hadith are not established. Now, there's two elements I want to highlight here. One is that, yes, we ourselves haven't done justice to Islam. And that is the reality, because we have allowed these narrations to go unfiltered. We have allowed them into these books. Because Muslims were so busy, they getting caught up in sectarianism, that they allowed these things to come through. That said, the other element is that these things are not authentic. And neither was that, even if you look at the text, neither was that the style or the general approach of the Prophet. The Prophet generally did not used to, hey, a verse is coming down, quickly somebody go get me a bone to write this on. This was not how the Prophet used to do things. Now, I mean, generally the Prophet would address people, especially if it was a verse like this speaking about trying to encourage people to go with this resistance. If there was a military expedition, then the Prophet would have been telling people that people gather together. On many occasions, the Prophet would go to the mosque, he would gather people. In other places, he would kind of, whoever was around him, he would gather them, say, this is the verse. Rather than the first thing he says is, quickly go get me somebody find me a bone to write this on. This is not how the Prophet used. So even the actual context of what it's describing the Prophet is something that the Prophet didn't used to do. So that shows the oddity about it. Then and neither did the Prophet used to hasten to write down verses. This let alone find a bone and stuff like this, right? So that problem, and then how does this actually reach us? It reaches us through problematic chains. Okay. But then, yes, we are part of the problem, that we have kind of deified, given this divine status to anything in Bukhari. Right, so I wanted to answer that then. Then there were some other objections. I want to go through these. There was this whole video of an ex-Muslim highlighting an ex-Muslim girl highlighting all the reasons she left Islam. Maybe there were more as well, but in this video anyway, nonetheless, she highlights a lot of reasons that led her to this understanding. And I will try to be as objective as possible in responding to those. I was asked to kind of look at that and respond. So I did watch it, and I won't lie, it was it's interesting to kind of sometimes watch these things. It was if I'm going to be honest, I didn't like it. Not because of the person leaving Islam, but the way it was kind of presented. And I've read some of the comments as well, and some people had highlighted as well that why mislead people? Maybe unknowingly, but nevertheless. Right, so this person highlights, and I think there's a lot of genuine concerns here, and I'd like to address them. There were certain things that this person was highlighting, this ex-Muslim, that were just false. And this is the problem, that why, I don't know whether that was because of a lack of knowledge. If that was because of a lack of knowledge, then I think you shouldn't just delve into these areas if you don't know. You should just say, look, I don't know. Some people have said this, some people haven't. But to present it as though it's true, absolutely fabricated hadith. Clearly, I'm not even talking about the ones that I normally critique, but just outright fabricated hadith. Using them and then saying, oh, by the way, people say that's not authentic. But this, I don't know. I found that a bit painful to watch, if I'm going to be honest, because obviously, look, to Muslims, and I accept that you have the right to be critical of Islam, and you can criticize whoever because you don't believe in them. But I would ask sometimes that, look, when it comes to people like the Prophet or things like, I mean, this is just a humble request and you don't need to listen to this. If any ex-Muslims are watching this and they don't, look, you don't need to listen to me, right? I obviously, that's obvious. But I would just from my heart, a little request that, look, when you speak about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, look, he is the most dear, like he's the most dear person to an incredible portion of humanity alive today. Now, I understand that you are bitter and or upset about Islam and maybe certain things that have come to you and traumatic experiences and things. But I would just, this is just my humble advice and you don't need to take this, but look, please, just show a certain amount of respect if that's possible. You know, this binti karta hu, you know, it's like my request, you don't need to accept it. But I would say, look, please, because it's painful for people to watch that, who obviously really respect, and the Prophet to them is incredibly dear. And at the end of the day, you're saying things, and I understand you're going to say, well, you know, well, why did the Prophet do this? But the question is going to come to, well, do you even know that he did that? Like a question of epistemology, like how do you know that that actually happened? So I would just say, look, either be objective, be fair, and if possible, please show a bit of respect, if you can. If you don't need to. You might hear this and say, you know, get lost. Fair enough. You know, but that's my humble request, especially when you're speaking about the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because I can imagine a lot of people unnecessarily, it's going to enrage a lot of, and not that that's what you're going to do. Like, I'm not saying that you need to kind of be intimidated or things like this. No, because I condemn any people abusing or trolling ex-Muslims. But I just feel that just out of courtesy, yaar, just have a bit, you know, that human compassion, man. It's a shared, you know, it's a narrative that so many, you know, countless, a huge portion of humanity hold so dear to them. Yeah, so even some, like me watching this, I even felt, I won't lie to you, I had to even stop it on a few occasions and think, wow. I just thought, you know, like I was really, I won't lie, I was actually hurt watching it. But you have the right to be critical, and I would never say that you don't have the right to be critical, even if you want to be critical of the Prophet, because you're not a Muslim, you have that right. And the Prophet himself, people swore at him, they attacked him, they did many things, and he responded with compassion. So it's from his message. I mean, you have the right to do that. But I would just say, if possible, a little tiny request from a nobody. Okay, so some of these issues, let's take a look at... Now, first of all, there were some fiqh issues that were raised. Now, these fiqh issues, they were tiny things, but I'll just go through some of them briefly. Like, this girl highlighted that things like plucking eyebrows, why do Muslims have an issue with this? Rulings against women. And I agree with that. I agree with what she's saying. She has a valid point. Why do Muslims have an issue with plucking eyebrows? And that hadith, as I've highlighted, it doesn't stand like that. And the Malikiyya and other ulama clearly highlighted a woman can pluck her eyebrows. She can do this. Is misconstrued. This was simply speaking, it was advice to a mourning period as a preventative measure. A woman who was going through mourning, as in to mourn the dead, her husband, as a widow, during that iddah period, she should just refrain, because it may cause certain social clash. Like if people are seeing, like, here's a widow, but she's too busy kind of like involved in makeup and all this kind of stuff. And it's not that it's haram per se, but it may cause people, because people are so tender with a loss, and they may think, what the hell's wrong with her? You know, her husband's just died and she's too busy trying to do, and people may react, and it's to safeguard her first and foremost, because people are so sensitive at that stage. They may say, oh, are you just so glad he died? And this happens around the world, by the way, due to people's ignorance. So I agree that these things shouldn't be haram, and I don't believe them to be haram, and I've got videos on that. And so there were things like music. Why is music declared haram? And I agree that music is not haram. So she has a very valid point here, that why did Muslims kind of declare music haram? There isn't a single sahih hadith to say that music is haram. Okay. There isn't nothing to kind of declare it haram. And I've got a video on that just to clarify. And to be fair, she kind of acknowledged, this ex-Muslim, that look, there are some Muslims who say it isn't and stuff like this. And then she went on about the hijab a bit as an issue, and I can understand that does. But you know, this, once again, this is something which, if we're going to be honest, there is a distinction between what Allah and His Messenger have said and what evolved as Islamic jurisprudence, Islamic laws, Islamic morality, or Islamic customs is a better word. Now, it is true that most Muslim customs do see the head covering as an obligation. Although, can that be questioned? Yes, and it has been questioned by several ulama. Because there is nothing conclusive in the Quran or the Sunnah that actually says a woman must cover her hair. There's nothing conclusive. There's, like, the verse in the Quran can allude to it. Like, no, it doesn't allude. Like, you can infer from the verse, but it doesn't state that women need to have head coverings, because it says that they use their humar, which is the head cloth, to cover their bosoms, the kind of chest area. Now, the question is, does that mean you must have a headscarf? So now you're inferring. So it's like saying, if I said, right, guys, okay, this is a dangerous, let's just say I said, this is a dangerous area. I want you all to use your sleeves, cover your watches with your sleeves. So if somebody says, okay, I'm going to cover my watch with my sleeve, does this mean it's necessary for all of us to be wearing a sleeved shirt? Now that becomes then a discussion. But yes, by and large, most people, not all, but most people, there has been some differences along the way, and hence Imam Malik kind of showing some distinction and some people showing other rulings. But generally, by and large, that ruling has come down and people have questioned it. Today, people like Khalid Abul Fadl from the States, or from Canada, I believe he is, Sheikh Javed Ghamidi, and other scholars around the world have issued rulings that head covering is not an obligation, but modesty is the obligation. But okay, this was a point that she mentioned, that why hijab, and I think this is, like I said, the main thing in Islam was about modesty. Right, so okay, right now, so then she highlighted some questions about witness testimony. Now, I think this, right, so this, somebody has highlighted there that I shouldn't mock Hindu gods then. I honestly do not know if I've ever mocked. I can't recall mocking a Hindu god per se, but I've mocked concepts. You see, now there's a difference between a concept and a person. Like, so I've usually, when I've spoken of people like Shri Ram, I've actually said Shri Ram, I've said Ramji, I've said things like this, Shri Krishna. I've not been disrespectful to them per se. And I've actually believed them to be, I've been very good people and amazing people, maybe prophets in their time. But the concept of, can there be a god with an elephant head, or can, like, chopping off and replacing a head with an elephant, is counter reason. So there's a concept and there's a person. That's different to, and I'll come to the incidents later of what some of these mocking incidents were about the Prophet Muhammad. Right, so okay, now witnesses and can female testimony equating to half of that of a man? I've mentioned before, first of all, that this is a misunderstanding. Okay, people like Sufyan ibn Uyayna and other people did say that that verse of the Quran did not mean about her forgetting that, and this was to do with intimidation. Yes, many schools of law did form to say, well, we won't accept women testimony in this, but we will in that. And they all disagree, by the way. The one she quoted saying that they don't accept women testimony in anything, I think she was pretty much quoting the Shafi'i school, because the other schools do accept women testimony. To the extent that Ata ibn Abi Rabah, the great scholar of Makkah and the student of Ibn Abbas, he unequivocally said very clearly in his school that a female testimony is in every single thing categorically. There is no dispute about that, he said. And Ibn Hazm further endorsed that. Right? So now what I'm trying to show is that, look, there is a difference between what opinions become standardized along the way. So you have narratives in early Islam, and then as the centuries kind of unfold and Islamic kind of this institutionalization takes place, culture forms, certain views become more standardized. And I accept that, and that is a shortcoming on Muslims, that we haven't challenged these things. But did Islam hold the answer to this? Yes, it did. In early Islam, many people said that's not true, that a female testimony is exactly the same as a man's. But that was because in money they were more likely to be intimidated. And hence many, like Imam Malik, he saw that intimidation in things like murder as well. Like, because if a person was going to be killed as a kind of consequence for murder, there was a greater chance of him intimidating the women of his age. So this, even today, if in any part of the world women are more likely to be intimidated in a certain thing, then let it be grouped, because it's less likely to group for group intimidation. Not because of them per se. That them per se are equal. Now this is where the hadith, the al-mu'minuna, the ba'duhum awliya'u ba'd, that, you know, even the verse of the Quran, you are just some like the others, that shaqa'iqur rijal, that innaman nisa shaqa'iqur rijal, they are the equal counterparts of men, women are. That is a sahih hadith as well. So the point is that these hadith are there, these rulings are there. So we do have this in our tradition that says, no, they are equal. And this was wherever there is a safeguarding measure, which was most likely at that time in wealth, and commonly in things to do with murder and stuff like that. But otherwise, if that's not the case today, then one woman is exactly the same as one man. Okay, so I'm just clarifying, okay. The other thing she highlighted was about hudud, capital punishments. And I have highlighted before, I've got a video on YouTube saying that, look, many ulama did challenge that. They said that the Sharia came with objectives for its day and age, that the rulings were only a social remedy. Islam never invented any of the punishments. These were punishments that the Arabs were already practicing, and they were practicing not slightly more than that. So they weren't just cutting off one hand, they would cut off two hands or feet as well. So what Islam did was it used their punishments and just curtailed it and gave a parameter. People challenged that later on. Imam Abu Qasim al-Burzuli, who over 600 years ago, the Maliki legend of his time, he said that the rulings in his day and age, the culture had changed, the understandings of ethics had changed. So rulings would be financial penalties in his day and age. They wouldn't be stoning people. This was unacceptable. The king even took up his ruling. The area, the Maghrib, had his ruling implemented and this went on. I mean, it varied in between, it fluctuated depending on who was in power, but for centuries, with many scholars supporting it. In the East, you had the famous Ottoman king, the Caliph, the Sultan, Suleiman al-Qanuni, Solomon the Magnificent, this great Solomon, the Ottoman Sultan. Why do they call him Qanuni, the legalist? Because he refined Islamic law. And what did he do? He said that the ethics have changed, and he replaced all the hudud, these capital punishments, with financial penalties and imprisonment. This is in our history. I'm not making this stuff up. So yes, this ijtihad, this ruling has been there. But yes, you are right as well that we Muslims have failed ourselves in not critiquing and allowing this kind of other narrative to become such a prevalent voice. So I accept that, look, in a way, we've kind of let ourselves down, but did Islam have the answer? Yes, it did. It had this answer, and this was implemented at a statutory level. The Ottomans, Solomon, he's seen as huge. Suleiman, Al-Qanuni was seen amongst the pioneers of the Ottoman caliphate and so on. Early on as well, so this isn't... Right, so another issue that was raised was one of polygamy. Now, why did Islam allow men to have multiple wives? Look, this ex-Muslim also, she said that I love science. She loves science. I love science too, but I'm just saying she said that during her thing. I find it fascinating that when it comes to the discussion of polygamy, one thing people no longer look at is science. And by polygamy, I mean multiple partners, not necessarily just marriage, which is an imaginative reality. Marriage is just a mental institution that we've, it's in our minds, that this institution of marriage. You see, the interesting thing is, right throughout nature, the male species are almost, not every single species, but are almost always polygamous. That is just the nature of human beings. We've got to understand that monogamy amongst humans is a social construct that we have come with. Hence, and I don't mean to sound like a pessimist, but hence, most modern relationships within 3 to 5 years collapse. Now, I'm not saying I'm not supporting these modern relationships, but what I'm trying to say is Islam was just going in line with what is, if we're going to be honest, human nature. Why is it that on some things we want to be very scientific and be real, but on other things we don't? We just push science aside. Science will tell you. You have to see that this is just species, and creatures are just like that, and human beings are just creatures too. Now, yes, polygamy has huge problems with it as well, and I'm not denying that it doesn't have problems. So does monogamy have problems. So does any relationship have problems. But if this was consensual, if there was a culture, what's to say that's so inferior? Why are people, I'm just saying, why are people so, it's okay to be homosexual, which I'm saying, fine, be homosexual. It's okay to be transgender, and I'm saying, fine, be transgender. But why is it evil to have multiple partners? Oh, it's okay to have an open relationship here, it's okay to be a swinger, and I'm saying, be that. But why is it that it's evil when Islam says that you can have, where's the consistency? That's what I'm asking. And this ultimately is just human nature. At least Islam didn't just, Islam applied rules. Now, one could argue that do people live up to the rules? And I would agree with you. Actually agree with you. That I think, especially in the modern context, most polygamous relationships will, beyond maybe that kind of buzz phase, will be probably disastrous. I would probably agree with you that they would be like a migraine level of a headache. And I'm with you on these things, agreeing with you, but I think it's unfair. It's biased to just say evil, evil, evil Islam. Why did it allow polygamy? This was a social way of living. What's wrong with... people do that all the time. Even today, most, let's just face it. There was a really good, actually, a brief clip I saw on YouTube about sex-starved relationships. And one of the key factors mentioned in most divorces in the Western world, it was actually showing statistics, is just a lack of sex. And I'm not saying that this has to, that's a whole discussion in itself, but what I'm trying to say is people that, in fact, in psychology, because the ex-Muslim said they're really intrigued by psychology, is what they call the Coolidge effect. That the moment, that this is just how, it's unfortunate. Like, men, we're doomed. But men are just always attracted to, and I don't just mean attracted like the way women are attracted. Women are attracted to men, which men, we don't seem to understand why women are attracted to us. That's just an enigma. That, to me, is the proof of God. That why do women find men attractive? I've got no idea. But generally, men are attracted to women in a total hysteria. I mean, it's, if I was to explain how, you guys would never view any man in that light again. You'd be like, but it's true. They're kind of like besotted, like by, and it's inexplicable. They can't even, I mean, that doesn't mean that men don't have a level of responsibility. They do, of their actions. Of course they do. But we're just being real that the way the male brain reacts to females, and people say, well, that's socialized. They say that's like it was learned behavior. But that's not true, because people say, well, to look at the female body, this is learned behavior, and women haven't been learned, socialized to look at men like that. But then you find research on gay men. Gay men will look at men in that same way. So once again, something that many of us may not understand, but they will. Research shows that they will look at men in that, and that wasn't socialized. So it shows it's actually in the brain. It's how the brain operates. But my point is, look, I agree that where things are being done wrong, unethically, that's true. But why just cast it and brand it as evil because it's from Islam? But you don't cast like open relationships as like evil, and I wouldn't. I'm just saying people to their lifestyles, you know, everybody to their own deen, their own way of life. So, right, so I think some feminists may not be happy with but by the way, I somebody actually questioned, they said the other day about me, and I'm quite intrigued actually, because they generally, when it comes to women's rights, I'm all up for that. I'm totally in favor of all of that, and I'll be in line fighting that fight. But when it comes to this man-hating culture, obviously I'm not going to be a part of that. I think, like, what on earth's wrong with me? That said, I totally am opposed to any kind of misogyny, unless it's in humor. Jokes, I think, should be unlimited. Anybody who wants to place caps on jokes, I think, imprison that person. Humor should have no bounds in my understanding. But beyond that, in the real world, in practice, misogyny, all these things are utterly unacceptable. I'm just making that very clear, okay? Right, okay. Right, let's move on to some serious things. So this ex-Muslim highlighted that the Prophets had a sex slave, Maria. Her name was Maria, actually, not Maria. But, I mean, anyway, that's irrelevant. Maria al-Qibtiyya, and it's not Mary, because Mary is Maryam. This is Maria. Right, so, but the point here, more importantly, I've highlighted in the past that we, the Muslims, the general Muslims, have, I feel, disrespected our Prophet in this transmission, because many people highlighted, including Muhammad ibn Zibala of Medina, the student of Imam Malik, one of the most earliest historians that we have, who wrote about Medina, he has a book, Azwajun Nabi, the wives of the Prophet. He's a student of Imam Malik. He highlights that Maria al-Qibtiyya was a wife of the Prophet. So we need to stop this seriously, and I've got a video on this previously, that she was a wife of the Prophet. She was not a sex slave. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. and radiyallahu anha. And yes, she lived in the Awali, she lived on the outskirts of Medina, but that's because many companions lived in the outskirts of Medina, the Awali. It wasn't actually that far, because Medina today is massive. Medina in the Prophet's time was just the size of his mosque today almost. So Maria lived there, and yes, she wasn't, her Arabic wouldn't have been on point and stuff like this. She was a non-Arab, hence maybe people didn't mingle with her so much because communication barriers. And the way this person described that, you know, the Prophet Muhammad thought, oh wow, I got myself a hottie and I got myself a beautiful kind of, you know, I just thought, look, none of these things have ever, like, I'm not saying she wasn't beautiful, I'm sure she was beautiful, but what I'm trying to say is, none of this is said in any of these transcripts. I understand you're just trying to belittle the Prophet by making these kind of statements, but they're not true. And then a story, she mentioned that one day Hafsa, the wife of the Prophet, had gone somewhere, and the Prophet said to Maria, I know, why don't you come to her house, her little room, she had these quarters, why don't you come there? And on her bed they had sex, and then Hafsa came back and she found out, and this is why the verse of the Quran was revealed. What nonsense! What nonsense! That is absolutely fabricated. Bring a single hadith. Like what? Where are you getting this from? And then she said, well, look, I accept that some Muslims may say it wasn't about this, but really, come on. Would you get angry over anything else as a woman? Like, look, why are you projecting like a whole narrative when you don't have a sufficient, like, come on, like what I'm trying to say is, this is weakening your whole case by presenting false narratives. This incident did not happen like this. Even the incident that you're trying to go by didn't have this story of, like, so there's one incident that the Prophet went to Maria, and some of the wives tried to say, well, when he comes here, he used to drink this honey when he was there, so they knew, and they said that they kind of like tried to say, oh, put him off and stuff like this. Even that is weak. But even that story doesn't mention anything about Maria being brought into Hafsa's house and having sex on her bed and stuff like this. This is absolutely fabricated. Like, so please, like, I mean, at least be objective. Then there were things about Aisha being 6 or 7 years old, and I've highlighted this before. Aisha was not 6 or 7 years old, and I've got a detailed video to highlight that. So please do check that. She was an adult at the time. She was most likely anything in her late teens. I mean, I've said she could have, the ages to be specific is difficult, but we know from how she participated in battles where people younger than 15, for example, weren't allowed to go, and stuff like this would have put her age at a certain timeline. I've said anything at the time could have been from 17, 18 to, some people say maybe 21, anything between that range. The Arabs weren't specific on keeping dates, but she was most certainly an adult. And then another fabricated incident, and I won't lie, because this was so fabricated, I was very offended to hear this. Like, to say that, well, because Aisha was a child, the Prophet got her and masturbated between her legs. And this was because she was a child. And that disgusted me, because look, what? And then she said, well, people might say, oh, this ain't true, but, you know. And I thought, look, it is because these are, like, you're presenting an incident as though it happened. And this is utterly fabricated. I mean, this isn't like, oh, this is in this book of Tirmidhi and we're just disputing the chain. This is utterly fabricated. Like, you're just bringing in a utterly fabricated incident so the listeners have discussed. And then you're going to say, well, okay, maybe it's not true. But it's too late, because you've created a visual image in the minds of the listeners. And then, so this is what I mean by trying to be objective. I found that, like, I don't know if that was done subconsciously or not really thinking about it. But if I'm going to be honest, I found that, I agree, I saw this comment as well. I agree that is no different to what extremists do in their own way. They just present a narrative, and maybe some of them are doing it naively. to kind of poison the mind of people with imagery, and then to say, well, maybe it isn't. You know, it's like if I used an esteemed figure, like I said, well, you know, like Nelson Mandela, or I don't know, I could use somebody as that everybody looks up to, and I say, oh, well, do you know on this one day what he did sexually to this little boy? And I go into visual imagery. I say, well, he had all these kind of sex toys, and I use all these, I don't know, handcuffs. I get creative with my imagination. And then I give this whole image, and then I say, oh, but by the way, that probably didn't happen. But that's not, like, come on, you can't do that. Like, that's, like, now you've created an image of disgust in the minds of the viewers. And then you've said, oh, well, you know, this may have not just happened. I just probably said that. So things like this were very disappointing. But other concerns, okay, fine. Yes, once again, the part of this blame comes back on us Muslims. Right, so who are we talking about? Right, okay, so part of the blame comes back on Muslims, why we keep pushing a narrative that Aisha was just a child, when she was not a child. She was not a child, people. I'm not just saying this. Look at the evidence. And I want to say something here, that this ex-Muslim raised a concern that, oh, is this because this narrative doesn't sound nice? Is that why you're pushing that aside? Like, basically, are you ignoring the other narrative because it doesn't sound nice, and you want to say that she was an adult because it sounds nice? Well, of course, and it's authentic. You see, you're saying, oh, are you only dispelling this because it doesn't sound right? Well, of course it doesn't sound right. And then that makes us re-examine. And then you're going to say, well, why don't you show all the things that... But look, going back to the stories, why is it that you... Like, what I'm trying to say is, when you have different narratives, it's okay for you to select narratives. Like in life, like if we're going to go back to the narrative story, everything is a story. The institution of marriage is a story. But it's okay for you to select that narrative and the narrative of, let's say, monogamy, and we're going to have one relationship over the others because it sounds nice to you, even though factually it's probably not true in as far as creatures are concerned in general, but it sounds nice. It's okay for you to support the narrative, and I do as well, of human rights because it sounds nice. Now, of course, some Muslims want to, or at least those with reason amongst us, want to believe in the narrative that already exists in the early sources, that yes, that sounds right. And we want to push something aside that doesn't sound right. But what's wrong with that? And there was another weird criticism that the ex-Muslim said that, look, I found many non-Muslims don't know about this evil stuff in the past. And they don't know about this. So I was a bit confused here that, well, when you're saying they don't know, obviously a lot of these things, some of them are just falsely inaccurate. I mean, they're just inaccurate, they're just false, but some of them may be in the books. Are you trying to say that, okay, so these Muslims know and believe a version of Islam that is actually better than what may be found in some literature? Then I'm just asking, what is the problem? Because if what they don't believe, because the problem is that people believe weird stuff. Now, if they don't believe that, then what is the problem? The fact it exists. Now, somebody may say there was something about the wife beating verse, and I have explained that. I've got a whole explanation that was abrogated. Now, they may say, well, why still have these things in the Quran? Yeah, but that is part of the Quran. There are many abrogated verses in the Quran. It's to show how things evolved. It's to show how rulings developed. It's to show that. Even if you're going to look at the American, for example, Constitution, they're going to have abrogated things in there. Now you're going to say, well, why don't you remove them altogether? And somebody may say, well, why? And you may say, well, somebody could misconstrue part of the Quran. And it's true, they can misconstrue part of the Quran, like ISIS have. Other groups have. Extremists have misconstrued part of the Quran. That is true. So you may ask, well, why don't we remove that from the Quran? And that is a legitimate concern. But I will ask you, I will answer that by saying, but do we not get the Bush administration misconstrued the Bill of Rights? It misconstrued the American Constitution to torture people. Did it not do that? Did it not? Do people not today misconstrue freedom of speech to be racist? Should we do away with freedom of speech? I mean, like what I'm trying to say is, yes, the proof is in the pudding. It's not that there's just like 10 Muslims throughout the world. Muslims represent a significant proportion, and you yourself will say, yes, most Muslims in the world are not like this. That is the proof. Most human beings do not distort freedoms, but some will. So yes, this is part and parcel of the Quran. It may lead a few people to misconstruing it, but the vast majority of Muslims have not misconstrued it. And yes, we need to work harder. We as Muslims need to work harder in trying to filter and brush away these cobwebs and filter these weird opinions. I take that blame upon ourselves, and I accept that to be a legitimate concern. And I'm not into these kind of weird apologetics. I accept that certain verses in the Quran meant certain things, and they were abrogated. So, just being clear on that. There was another point about wars, that what Islam was spread by the sword. That is false in that understanding. Okay, yes, there were wars during the Prophet's lifetime. The ex-Muslim said, couldn't the Prophet think of any other ways than war? And of course he did. And the Prophet did not initiate those wars unless the one or two that you can think out of the general 9 that are highlighted. The vast majority of all the wars the Prophet participated in were defensive. And that's just, you can just read Seerah. I'm not making that up. So the one or two, like Ghazwat Tabuk, were preemptive because of the Roman settlements and things like this. Now, what I'm trying to say here is that, look, when you look at this question, could the Prophet not think of something? Of course he could. It's in our tradition. The Prophet actually wrote letters. He wrote to Herakl. He wrote to, this is in Bukhari, it's in these other books. He wrote letters. He did do this. He sent emissaries. He sent convoys. He sent people. And she said that there was this general understanding that Muslims, wherever they would go, they would say, we give you 3 options and we're going to kill you. And the Prophet did this. It is not proven that the Prophet ever did that. There are hadith, and those hadith have problems. Right? They are hadith and they have problems. The popular wars of the Prophet are well known. And none of them had that incident. Yes, can we argue about Muslim history? Yes, I mean, I'm not saying throughout Muslim history did this ever happen. Of course, look, human history, Muslim, non-Muslim. It doesn't matter whether you're Muslim. People, there's been good and bad in all people. So yes, human beings are obsessed with power. And yes, many Muslims have conquered, but many Muslims have conquered peacefully too. Many liberations have taken place. In fact, the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula, Muslim Spain, most of it was not done through warfare. It was just done through treaties, because there was no way they could have conquered within like a month an entire peninsula. No way. A small span of people, a small number of people. No way they could have conquered and taken down the Visigoths or the remnants of the Visigoths and the Romans and within a number of weeks. No, impossible. And that too in a landscape that they are aliens and foreigners to. They don't even know. They themselves, historians say, they were just treaties because of how poorly those Christians were being treated by the Romans. And by their rulers, that they chose that, well, at least with Muslims, we've got more liberty. So look, be fair. Yes, there have been some Muslims who have done atrocious things. I'm not going to deny that. But that's not fair to put that blame on the religion as a whole. I'm just saying it's not fair to do that. It's like saying, just because Christians have had a hatred for Jews, which they still do. Christians have a hatred for Jews, which for centuries they've been it's been dogmatically taught to them because the Jews killed Jesus Christ. Now, Hitler, if anything, being a Christian, could easily spread this narrative of the Nazis of hating Jews because Christians for centuries have had a hatred for Jews. But it's not fair to put that back onto Jesus now. I'm just saying it's not, and I know that analogy may not completely fit, but it does in part. So the wars, it's not true if you're going to be objective, not with the Prophet's lifetime. And some places wars did take place, and yes, I'm not saying some part of Islam as a conquest may have happened by the sword, but other parts, huge parts, did not. So that's divorce was something that was brought up, and I want to say I think that's a valid concern that the ex-Muslim had, that divorce is a chaos, there's chaotic schemes or measures within Muslim jurisprudence. True, I think the way the Muslim culture is, that it's a nightmare. She said that the man can just pronounce divorce, whereas a woman has to seek a divorce, and that is kind of true. Now, in most cases, whenever a man pronounces divorce, it is almost always a nightmare. Almost always. The amount, honestly, I've probably in my time seen thousands, spoken to thousands over the years, like maybe the last decade, at least thousands of people about divorce I've spoken to. It is almost always a nightmare. Yes, fiqh can work towards, with ijtihad, barring and preventing that. I believe it can. It has the mechanisms, and today several councils, several boards in several parts of the Muslim world, like even in Pakistan recently, there's been discussions in India, this whole triple talaq thing, and in other parts of the world, a regular talaq is seen null and void. But the problem is the Muslim culture hasn't caught up with that. And it is a difficult, arduous task. I do agree with that. But at the same time, I feel that it's not that Islam doesn't have the scope to deal with it, but Muslims have to catch up. And we're playing catch up. That's the problem. And most Muslims yet are not accepting things like that just because of the way things are. But that doesn't mean the religion doesn't have scope to say, well, can a man's verbal talaq be banned? I believe it can, with ijtihad. And much of this ijtihad has already been done, and that ruling has already been given. But it hasn't caught up. Now to say, well, a woman needs to go to a man and ask this man scholar for a divorce, look, that's prejudiced language. Because look, any well-functioning Sharia council, not these redundant ones, but any functioning Islamic council will grant a talaq. I mean, generally between anything to 3 to 6 months, and generally like can be done within 3 months. Now you could say, and this is known, not, I mean, you can actually research this yourself. Don't just take my word for it. On average, their procedures take about 3 months. Now you may say even if it's stretched out 6 months, that is still faster than any civil procedure here. A civil procedure here for a decree absolute in divorce on average takes 1 year to 2 years. And that's also a man. You know, like I must go to a man to ask him to end my relationship. Where's your outcry towards civil divorce in the West? In the UK I can speak about, is atrocious. It's a nightmare. Why must I pay somebody thousands of pounds and take 2 years to tell me that I can end a relationship? Why? Like, that's ridiculous. It's absurd. Now, you could say, well, true, but you could say, well, here, both the man and the woman must do that. So that's the only problem. Like, I'm just saying the only problem here isn't the system, but it's, okay, women go through a system that takes, let's say, 3 months or 4 months, maximum like up to 6 months in certain places. And men may not necessarily need to do that. That could be improvised according to Islamic law, but it hasn't caught up yet. But here, men and women must equally suffer for 1.5 years. So that system is okay because they're both suffering. Like, I'm just saying, shouldn't we be calling to the abolition of all these atrocities? That's ridiculous. The modern divorce system is stupid. I totally find it absurd that why a court must tell a person you can now end this relationship in 2018. But yet there's no outcry towards this. That's all okay. Or go to a man, or even, why must a man or a woman have the right to tell me who I can and cannot have a relationship with? It's 2018, for God's sake. And to say, now I can end my relationship. Get lost. I can end it when I want. This, okay, you could say, well, sure, well, I'm just saying, like, I agree, but there's double standards. There's a double standards here. That's what I'm saying. There doesn't seem to be no outcry towards the common issue what we're facing here about a civil divorce, right? And that is triple the time frame of an Islamic talaq by any measure in a functioning Islamic Sharia council. So I'm just saying that, but I do agree. I agree that some arguments are sustained. We must be fair that the man uttering the talaq like this, I actually would rule, if I had, obviously my ruling is that we would go with the ijtihad to outlaw this. And it should be a process and both should be equal. Anything ranging about 3 months, something like that, maybe up to about, depending on the mediation, maybe about 6 months. But that sounds fair, and it should be for both, I agree, but the Muslim world hasn't caught up. And some places are doing this, but Islam has this capacity. Then there was a very interesting point, and I think that this ex-Muslim raised about hell and heaven. And hell and heaven don't make sense. And look, I understand that this is a very powerful point that she made. And she said, look, I think, more so I think about hell. I think so. I could be wrong, but my understanding was she was more struggling with hell, as most people are. And she said, why must good human beings suffer? And I agree with you. Why must they? And I don't think that narrative is the only narrative in Islam. I have highlighted in the past that people like Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, I've highlighted scholars like Imam Ghazali saying that thing didn't count once the message of Islam became distorted in his Risala, and hence he said that all the people in the part of the Byzantine Empire in his time, that they were considered fine. There wasn't, because Islam was distorted. The same thing I quoted previously, the great jurist Al-Baydawi, the Hanafi jurist, who's quoted by Maliki sources saying, even if a kafir uses his reason or a disbeliever and says there is no God, he says his understanding was that would suffice, because he used reason. What I'm trying to show is there is some diversity. And look, and there were people like Ibn Rushd, the great Muslim philosopher, who said hell isn't like that. It's like a consciousness and stuff like this in the afterlife. And it's not necessarily like fire, and this kind of stuff was just symbolic. There were people, like I mentioned, like Ibn Arabi, Ibn Rushd, who had this understanding. They said it's more about, and I think maybe in some ways, here's a thought, that maybe that this whole Abrahamic faith that have this, they are Millatu Ibrahim. And maybe this whole narrative in this sense, this millah came through Ibrahim alayhi salam, as it was, let's say, revealed to him, and hence it's called millah to Ibrahim. Maybe the other earlier prophets that were in other parts of the world, maybe in places like India, for example, their millah was different. Hence their narratives may have been different. That's food for thought. And I think, hence they had a very different kind of way of looking at how once you go from this world, it's different. It isn't like about fire and heaven like that. It's more, and maybe they were different milal that were earlier kind of revelation. But what I'm trying to say is this millah to Ibrahim, one thing we do know is that we know nothing about the afterlife. That is the truth. And these things in the Quran are mentioned as kind of symbolically, like even Ibn Abbas and these people said, look, we don't understand anything. Where it mentions fire, it doesn't mean fire how we understand this. So what I'm trying to say is, yes, this is a truly difficult topic to grapple with, and that's an argument which is sustained. I accept that, and I also accept that this view that all non-Muslims or people must burn and stuff like this, I accept that that's something that doesn't settle. And I too agree that the mercy of Allah surpasses everything. And that is not what I believe will happen with people, because Allah is saying all these things, and part of the whole and as the Muslim theologians have said, look, none of these, like many of them said that these could just be threats that Allah is saying, because people generally work with it. Now I know people may criticize this and say, well, that's, and I accept that argument. Look, I'm trying to be fair. I'm accepting. I mean, go a little easy on me. Like, I'm trying to say that, look, I accept that these are, like points that these are that people would struggle with and stuff like that. But even within the Islamic scope, there was a huge disagreement. That's what I'm saying. And yes, one narrative has become more standardized with time. But the other narratives are still there within the Islamic tradition, but they've just got kind of subdued with time. Right now, so these were some of the things I really wanted to highlight, some of the topics. I want to say, look, maybe I want to conclude because it's getting really late and I'm ever so sorry for kind of dragging on. That, look, somebody would say, look, we're agnostic, these people said, like these ex-Muslims, most of them said they're agnostic, and one could argue that we are all agnostic to some extent. I suppose we are, all of us. We don't know with certainty. I don't believe you can prove in any way that there is a God or that there is this. But yes, I will say something. And I've been asked this by atheists as well. Like, they've asked me that, look, you seem to advocate the voice of reason and all of this. So why do you believe then? Why do you believe? And I've said that, look, I honestly, because to me, life, just life itself, life with a capital L, the wonder it encapsulates, like just life per se, it is so mesmerizing that I see in it that this majesty must have some meaning. Like, to me, this having no meaning, being meaningless, it doesn't cut it. Like, to me, that's my personal thing. I feel there must be something, there must be meaning to this thing. We're not, like, we are part of something much greater than us. We are, we're not just like this is just haphazard, like this is just nothing. Like, that's, to me anyway, I feel. And then from the traditions, yes, it is true, I was born in a Muslim family, and most Muslims today are just Muslim because they're born in a Muslim family. But it is also true that Islam, and that out of all the faiths that generally do exist, that Islam does, from them, seem to be the one that can, if by any measure, stand. Not only has it stood the test of time, but it stands the test of reason, in my understanding. Now, people may argue against that, and that's actually, there was an amazing quote written by Arthur Clarke as well, the great science fiction author who wrote The Space Odyssey as well, where he said, if any religion makes any sense, because people asked him, what would you describe? He was an agnostic. He said, I would say that if any of them can actually stand to the test of making sense, it is Islam. But he was kind of let down by Muslims. He said, but I feel Muslims today are just behaving like Christians. And hence he didn't embrace Islam. And these criticisms stand true. Look, a lot of these issues, I want to say this to ex-Muslims or people turbulent in their faith, or just regular listeners, that look, there are genuine concerns in a lot of these questions. From our fiqh, the way we practice Islam, to how Muslims, we unfortunately have a culture of misogyny, of putting down women. We have a culture of ignoring, not like being sometimes anti-progress or being anti-technology or anti-science or anti-reason. We have a very harsh outlook sometimes. Certain Muslims, we have a very pessimistic outlook of the world and the afterlife. And these things are sustained arguments. I'm not gonna dismiss them. They are sustained arguments. But we do have the answers in our tradition as well. I'm not saying, look, to people who Islam, they doesn't settle with them, that's fine, but Islam has the answers. The problem is we have failed in bringing that to the forefront, in allowing this understanding to kind of become the standardized, in failing to challenge people when they are presenting absurd Islamic things, in looking into them. And this is why I do encourage, especially Muslims, I encourage Muslims to really learn Arabic and then start a personal journey to discover Islam. Wallahi, it is, whether the faith settles with you or not, it will be one of the greatest personal expeditions in your life. I'm telling you, it doesn't matter how far you go off. I'll tell you, just a few days ago, I was coming back in the morning from the gym. It must have been about like 4 a.m. or something. And I was just driving and I put the radio on and I'm just distracted in all my thoughts. And it had the tilawa on this radio station. So, and not that I'm often listening to tilawa in the car, but this particular time I did. And wallahi, because you understand the words, it comes in with such a kind of overwhelming, majestic force. It grips you, wallahi. Like it doesn't matter where, wallahi, that the rope, as Allah says, that kind of binds you to Him, that فَأَتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ, that hold on to this rope. It kind of reels you in, wallahi. Like I wasn't even trying to listen. I'm going to be honest. I just put the radio and it was on and I was just driving and the words and the verses and wallahi overwhelmed me. And it just really brought me back in, like just as a, for those moments, those few moments. And this is why I advise people that if you can learn Arabic, just for it to have, just to understand its meaning with that profundity, with that profound kind of experience. I mean, I hope this is been of some help. I didn't mean to, by the way, those ex-Muslims, if they do watch this, I didn't mean to in any way be dismissive of your concerns. And I do welcome, I even, like I said, any kind of sometimes discussions, or if people have questions or queries, they can reach out to me. I actually do feel that these are people who are actually have grappled with religion and are struggling, and I don't say that in any kind of like a pity or a sympathetic sense. I say that in a genuine sense, and I ask all people to really show respect and love if possible. We're all on a human journey at the end of the day. We're all on a human journey. And everybody's kind of in their own way, kind of going through certain turbulence. And it's an existential crisis for us all. As Plato said, he said, be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a difficult battle. SubhanAllah, it's amazing, profound words. Right, so, people, with that, I'm going to leave you to it, inshallah. It's incredibly late, especially here. So guys, if you do want to reach out, Facebook, message me, Snapchat, Malm2014, like my page, share it, subscribe to my YouTube, stay in touch, stay blessed, take very good care of yourselves, people. Right, till next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.